So we're going to get started today. We're going to continue on our series, Being a Mountain Mover. And I will tell you, this is an issue that all of us have to deal with. When the scripture tells, when Jesus said that you could tell that mountain to be moved and cast into the sea, that our faith had the ability to do that. Now, you might be thinking about real mountains, the mountains that really don't impact you, like the Sandias, or you have the Colorado, the mountain Pike Peak and all the rest. But the mountains that Jesus was speaking of are those mountains that seem insurmountable, those that you cannot, that stand in your way, the mountains in your life, whether it be fear, anxiety, it could be unforgiveness. There's mountains in our lives that just are so great. And Jesus says that if you have that faith, if you trust him in his word and all that he has to say, that mountain in your life that you think is so big, God says you could tell it by faith to be cast, and believe it and cast into the sea. So we start with this. I think we left off with this last week. Your faith is not going to remove your mountain. God is going to remove your mountain. So he has to be the object of our faith. I think you can also have faith in your faith, or you can display faith in your own faith. In other words, you want so hard to believe, but that you're questionable. You're thinking, you know what, I'm going to do it by the amount of faith that I have. And really, it's not the amount of faith that you have by itself, but the amount of faith that you have in God. Now, let me just say this. I used to think that I needed to build up all this faith. There needs to just be a room full of faith. Really, all you need to do is just be able to trust God. If you trust God, if there's nothing else in your life that you use as a crutch, and you say, well, Lord, I'm gonna go out there without a net. I'm gonna believe everything you say. I trust you. That's what God's looking at, and that's what God's looking for. That we just, without wavering in our lives, we trust God, even though our circumstances look bleak. That we trust God. So, but doesn't it make sense to pray to God and seek him who has authority? Part of that faith or trust comes from having communications. Rona can trust me and I can trust her because we have communications. We talk to each other. We know all the time. We know each other's heart. We know each other's desires, what we want, and we have the same thing in common. We want to do the things of the Lord. We love our family. Rona doesn't have to convince me. Like last week, the girls, somebody needed to watch the girls. So I said, well, I'll do it. I'm off, right? And most guys would be like, I'm not taking care of 2 little girls. But there I was, reading books and playing dolls. And when it came down to it, I made memories of my granddaughters. You know how many people wish they could spend time with their grandchildren, and I had them all to myself. And it was just such a blessing to have that. And just to read to them and for them to fall asleep in my arms. And Zoe was scared, Emmy was scared the other day. She stayed with us. And, Rona's got dolls everywhere. And so she says, Papa, I'm scared. And we turned the lights off in our room. I said, why are you scared? Because Noni has dolls in this room. Right? And I told her, yeah, but you have Papa. I said, Papa is always here for you. Those dolls can't hurt you. I said, your daddy used to sleep in here too. When he was a little boy, and he'd be afraid of the dolls. I think he's actually still afraid of them. But anyway, the other grandkids, when they stay in the other bedroom where she has more dolls, they turn the dolls around so they're not looking at the bed, right? I think the thing that kind of freaks me out, I'm not afraid of them, are like clowns. You see clowns in the corner and stuff. Yeah, you see enough movies that, okay, is his eyes moving? You kind of get freaked out with that, right? And so, anyway, but I told her, you don't have to worry because you have your Papa. And she slept holding on to me all night. And I thought Rona even made a comment that she woke up during the night. Rona did, and saw little Emmy holding on to me. And I I think that's exactly how we should go to sleep every night, is resting in the arms of God, holding on. And, actually, God holds on to us. When you hold a grandchild's hand going across the street, are they holding your hand or are you holding their hand? You are absolutely holding their hand, and nothing's going to get them out of your grip. And that's exactly the picture that God wants us to have, that perfect peace and rest in Him, knowing that there may be things that are out there that are scary and that freak us out. But we have God, and a God before us who can be against us. Can men have fears? Yeah, Ray talks about anxiety. But, we could have fears that, like Jim, get sick, what happens to my family? Those are realistic fears that we can have. And so that's why we need to trust in the Lord. And so it makes sense that we need to have communications with God, and that comes by way of a prayer life. I'll tell you, praying is just so important to me. I never saw it, the value of it, as much as I do today. I would pray, but not like I do today. And when things come to me, I am prepared because I'm prayed up for it. I'm not trying to catch up. I am prayed up. And so when things come, like last night I shared this thing with Rona, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm going to use a different analogy. Sometimes we just need to encourage each other. Just because we live in the same house doesn't mean that she knows everything that I know, or that I know everything she knows about the Word. And it doesn't mean that she somehow has that God gives her an exemption because I'm a pastor. She still needs to study the Word. She still needs for herself to have faith and courage to do the thing that God called her to do. And some of you have been seeking God for an answer, and He's answered you, but you don't claim your victory because you don't see it. And, I used to think, well, it's kind of hard to say thank you, Lord, for this stuff when I don't have it yet. But when the kids were asking for Christmas gifts, what we usually do is that we'll get a flyer or something, and Rona will tell the kids, circle the things that you would like. Now, we pick out of those things. They don't get everything out of it, right? But when they hand that back to us, they always say, thank you, Papa. Thank you, Noni. They're excited because they pick things that they want. And you know what? That's exactly the picture of God, is that we circle things that are important to us. And God then gives us the things that we see are most valuable, that lend more credibility, that they can use, that are really practical. I'm not going to get the kids something that is way beyond their skill level or that is dangerous for them. I would never do that. And God doesn't do that with us either. And practically, everyone who came to Jesus had weak faith. Not everybody that came had great faith. They were hopeful. But hope and faith are not the same thing. In Matthew 14, when Jesus was walking on the water, in fact, let's go there. And if you remember, Peter asked him, Lord, bid me to come out. I think that's pretty cool. Have you ever asked God in the middle of a storm, Lord, call me to come out to you? No, we want to stay what's close, don't we? We want to be anchored. We want to stay on shore. We want to be close to the things that are, we want to be on land or whatever. And this is an encouraging story. And it starts in Matthew 14, starting in verse 22. And it says, immediately He made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of Him to the other side while He sent the crowds away. And afterwards, He had sent the crowds away. He went up on the mountain by Himself to do what? To pray. And when it was evening, He was there alone. Now, let me just say something about this. If Jesus ought to pray alone, we should too. You don't want any distractions. And some distractions could be good. Right? I mean, there are some things that your grandkids may have fallen down. All of a sudden you need to go and help them. But can I tell you that if you have distractions that keep you away constantly from the things of God, you really need to reevaluate what's most important to you. Okay? Turn off your phone. Some people will never turn off their phone. Oh no, somebody might need to get a hold of me. And guess what? When you're praying, somebody always gets a hold of you. But while you're not praying, you're doing things, you don't seem to have those interruptions. And so I think it's important for us. We see that Jesus went on his own away to pray. And he told his disciples after he sent the crowds away. And he sent them away. He went to the mountain by himself. God always goes to higher ground. I'm grateful because when we're in the hole, we need somebody outside the hole on higher ground that can lift us up, don't we? And he went by himself, and it was evening. But the boat was already a long distance from the land. And it says, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them. So we see when there was fear that came their way, that Jesus spoke to them to bring comfort. Now I want you to remember that Jesus talks about, my sheep hear my voice and they know my voice. And sometimes we don't react to that voice because we don't know that voice. God's voice is strange to us. And when we're not praying and we're not seeking the Word of God, God will tell you go this way, but you're not sure. And sometimes, like you were sharing your testimony, it looks legit, and then boom, you're caught in the middle of it. And something that seems so promising that's prompting you, and you're thinking, wow, this looks legitimate. And even that will draw you in. But immediately in verse 27, Jesus spoke to them saying, take courage. Take courage. So what does he address? Their fear. That's the first thing he addresses with them. Don't be afraid. It's me. And sometimes we're surprised when God shows up in the middle of our storms because we've been so desolate. Last week, I think it was, Rona and I watched that movie, Cast Away. He was on that island for almost 5 years by himself with Mr. Wilson. Remember Mr. Wilson? Yeah. And, you know, that's quite an amazing thing to be there by yourself. And anyway, I think sometimes we feel like that we're marooned on an island. You know, it's worse than the SS Minnow, and we're there and we're trying to get off. But the Lord tells him, take courage, it's I. Do not be afraid. Now, their eyes got off the storm, and their fear now was on Jesus. And Jesus says, I'm not your problem. I'm not your fear. I love you. You don't need to be afraid of me. And Peter said to him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water. Now, let me tell you, we could do a message, we could do a series on verse 28. That you know, we test the spirits. Doesn't the Word tell us that we test the spirits? Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out. Tell me to come to you. And how many of us are comfortable leaving the boat? I'll tell you what. Whenever we go on a cruise and they always have that drill where you have to go with your life vest, and even though they tell you not to bring your life vest, I'm wearing my life vest. Okay? It's just the water. I'm okay as long as I don't look over the boat. I'm all right. But I just, that's a serious drill for me. When I walk in a building, and it's a building that I'm not familiar with, I want to know where the escape routes are at. I want to know where the left and where the right stairway are at. I want to know where the exit is at. I want to know all those things. Because if I'm ever caught in a situation that I need to get out, I want to know how to get my family out of there. Whether it's a restaurant, there's an active shooter situation, whatever it might be. And can I tell you that it's no different when we seek out the Word of God. I want to know all these things. I read of Job. Incredible. Job says, Lord, even in my skin, when I'm in my skin, when this skin fades away, I will see you face to face. Wow. Verse 29, he said, come. Isn't that incredible? We ask God, is it you? If it is, Lord, call me out. Sometimes in your storm you need to know and hear that still small voice that's calling you out. And you say, Lord, if it's you, call me out. Now listen, you got to listen for the voice of God to speak to you. Because it doesn't offer up any type of excuse or explanation. Simply come. It's a call to obedience. Come. And what did Peter do? Immediately he got out of the boat and he walked on the water and he came toward Jesus. And that's exactly what our storms are there for. They're opportunity for us to come to God, to come closer to God, to reach God. But then in verse 30, we're familiar with this. It says, but seeing the wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Who here has ever had that feeling of sinking and failing in life? Yeah, I'm sinking, Lord. I don't have the strength. I don't have the courage, Lord. I'm so beaten. Lord, I don't have any strength in me. Look what it says in verse 31. Immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and took a hold of him. That's the promise, my friends. That's the promise as we go through storms and we're obedient to God's call to come. Right? That even when we begin to sink, even when our condition and the environment and everything around us is taking us in and we're going below water, we're taking on water, when we're being swallowed by the circumstance, we see that immediately Jesus is there and he said to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And so we have a connection here, a correlation between doubt and sinking. And why did he sink? Because he began to look at the circumstance. He began to look at his environment instead of the one who called him out and the one who can save him. He began to think, I believe that Peter began to ponder his own strength. How do I deal with this? Now, he swims. I know he swims because we can read in John, the last chapter, where he jumps out of the boat and he swims to Jesus, right? Who's on the shore. I don't think you'd want to take up an occupation of being a fisherman if you didn't know how to swim. And so not only were these guys on the boat fishermen, they were seasoned fishermen. Okay? These were guys who dealt with storms their whole lives. And the verse that says, Jesus immediately stretched out his hand and he said to him, "Will you a little faith?" And when they got in the boat, the wind stopped. Isn't that incredible? Now, I think the wind stopped because God was in the presence of those who were in the storm. And so it's an invitation for us to come out, but it's also an invitation for Jesus to come on board. When you have a problem, do you solicit the help of the Lord? Do you say, Lord, I need you to come on board with me. I need you, Lord, to be on board. Whatever you called me to do, I just need to know, Lord, that I'm doing the right thing. And Father, that I'm doing your will, your desire, your purpose, your work. When they got into the boat, the wind stopped. Oh, what a blessing. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." When we see the work of God, even the little things, like our dog who had to drag its rear legs now because we prayed, and it's been given the miracle of being able to walk, that should drop us to our knees and worship. You are truly God. But sometimes we just pat ourselves on the back that we prayed. Yeah, I prayed for it. Yeah, it's my prayer that got it done. No, it's not your prayer. It's the God on the other side of your prayer that got it done. Your prayer in and of itself, there's a lot of people who pray. And we went over this summer, we went over a series where God doesn't hear all prayers, does he? If you have iniquity in your heart, God does not listen. If you have doubt, that word tells us in James, let not that man who has doubt think he'll receive anything. So, there's so much meat on that bone. And I need you to listen as we get into this just a little bit more. Pay attention, because God is speaking to you here. That he made his disciples, in verse 22, get into the boat. See, it almost reads as though they didn't have a choice. He made them get in the boat. That would imply to me they didn't have a choice. Get on the boat. Now, there may have been a conversation, I don't know, where they said, well, Lord, what about you? Don't worry about me. I'm good. I'll catch up to you. Get in the boat. Okay, let's go, guys. And maybe they were looking at each other like, I don't know what he's going to do, but he says he's going to be there. So let's get on the boat. Maybe they're looking around for a ferry to see if there's some other way that he's going to get there. And he told them, get in the boat. I have these crowds. I have to deal with the crowds. Guys, I need to separate you. I need to begin to thin this out. I need you to go so I can get the crowd to disperse. And it said that after he sent the crowds away, he went up to the mountain to pray. Jesus always went up to the mountain. Do you remember when we read about him going to the Mount of Olives? And he would go and pray there nightly. The word said that was his routine. That was his custom. That he would go to a place where they would get the nectar out of the olive. And how would they do that? By putting them through a press where there was pressure. And in that pressure, the olive would release the nectar that was so important to the people. And it's the same thing today that God puts us in a press somewhere where we need to go. The pressure, when it comes up against us, and we're doing the things of God, that when it does come upon us, that the nectar of God, the sweetness of God comes out of us. It oozes from us. That's exactly the picture here. And then he left and he went up to the mountain to pray, and the boat had already gone. And sometimes we come to church and Bible studies and church services. We come to concerts and seminars and conferences, and we get all excited, don't we? We hear other people sing. We hear praise and worship. We think, wow, that's a great praise and worship. And you get caught up in the moment. I've been there. I've heard some great groups play. It's like they're just incredible. And then you learn, well, these guys are just paid musicians. They're not even Christians. They're just paid musicians, which a lot of the big churches do. They just hire out these great musicians to play this music. And then sometimes we allow that music to be the only thing that moves us. And though God can use praise and worship, the idea of praise and worship is that when we do it, God will inhabit the praise and worship of his people. It's not for you, it's for him. And so we need to be mindful. And you tell yourself, man, how wonderful it was. And we read that they left a large crowd and seen the miracles of Jesus. They witnessed lives that were changed. They were pumped. These guys were excited, man. No doubt that they realized that they were on the winning side. Wow. Can you imagine that we're part of the original group, that we get to walk and talk with Jesus? That we sleep right next to him, the same bedroll, we share the same food, the same campfire. Like, man, this is great. And when you're starting from the ground up with something, it could be very exciting. I mean, they were traveling with God. They walked and talked to him. How exciting to be on the ground level, seeing the apostles, all that they were able to see. But now we see that Jesus sends the crowd away, and I'm sure they're all talking about the great teachings, how satisfied they were. Life took on a different look. Have you ever gone there like that before? Go on to another church, maybe somebody invited you, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is moving, this is incredible. And I know people who have done that. They've gone, somebody invited them, and then all of a sudden they get sucked into that. But they're not getting fed. See, it's all the thrills and the frills of a big church. They get excited about all those things. They hear that music and they think, wow, these are great musicians. I can get into the worship. But then afterwards, it's like the word, you hear it, and it's not doing anything for your life. And we can be at the right place with the wrong motive. Does that make sense to you? You could be at the right place with the wrong motive, and it'd be no benefit of you. See, life took on a different look here. When Jesus spoke, the people had hope, and people made decisions to follow him. And like I said, they were motivated, they were excited, and ready to take on the world and the religious hypocrites. But Jesus causes a separation here. And that he sends his true believers, his apostles, on a very short trip on the other side of the Sea of Gennesaret, and he tells them, meet me on the other side. They get in the boat and they push off. And maybe they have that conversation like I say. Maybe, I can only imagine what the conversation was like among the disciples. Maybe they were chest bumping, give each other high five, knuckles. I don't know. Maybe they're just really excited about everything that they saw. And they're really sure about Jesus right now. Yes, we're doing the right thing. It feels right. And that's dangerous too. To do things because it feels right. And then the skies begin to darken just a little bit. The clouds, they begin to swell, and they begin to roll in, and it was very ominous, and the sky darkened. And they probably thought, hey man, don't worry about it. We deal with storms all the time. But these weren't regular storms. Or they weren't regular clouds, and it wasn't a regular storm. And the word says that it was evening. Now, okay, we've been in high seas before, and they were rough. Okay? But being in high seas in a storm at night, that, for me, I'm sleeping with everybody's life jacket. I'm making sure it's right next to me. And I tell you guys, I am fearful of the water. I am not joking in any sense of the word. I am so afraid of the ocean. I don't get near it. To get on a ship is a big thing for me. It says it was evening, and I just can't imagine being out there at night. When I flew to Japan, I was going out there for the Army, and it was completely dark. You know how you fly, and even when you're flying over somewhere, you're coming in, you always see lights somewhere. Maybe there's a little ranchero in the middle of nowhere, but you see one light, and you think, well, people live nearby, right? Little ranch. Guy's got one horse, and that's his ranch. But when I was flying over Japan, and when I went to Norway, there was nothing, no lights as far as you could see. I think I'd have rather gone down maybe in the snow than the ocean. I don't know. It took 24 hours to get to Norway in a C-130. I had a lot of time to think about that. But see, the storm began to have an effect on the boat. And because the apostles were in the boat, it began to have an effect on them. And no doubt their time of celebration and adoration changed. Now their attention's no longer on God or on Jesus. It's on themselves. Have you ever been there? It's like you come to church, it's like, one of the things that I'm very careful, and I tell the men here, I don't want to know about a problem before church. I don't want to hear it. I just don't want to hear it. Because I don't want the devil to have his way. I don't want him to pollute the pulpit. I don't want him something that, just, if it can be dealt with afterwards, then, but if it's critical, obviously, if we had an emergency outside, I want to know about that. But I don't let distractions come my way. I don't look at my phone. I turn it on vibrate. And if somebody tries to get a hold of me, I generally don't know until afterwards or that night. These guys just saw 5,000 people get fed. Maybe closer to 20,000. Because it said 5,000 men. You can imagine if the women were with them, and if they had children. They just saw the miracle of Jesus multiplying the fish and chips, and how incredible that was. But they forgot about that. See, that's what storms do, is they test us, but they also bring perseverance and stamina and endurance to us. Storms take your eye off of who God is, and it puts it on you. It God and the miracles that he had just performed on land was not the thing they were focusing on. They forgot who God was. And let me ask you, if you're honest with yourself, when you begin to have trouble in your life, don't you try to start trying to do it on your own? And then you realize, I can't do this. And then what do? Rather than go to God, we panic. And more than not, what Christians do is they pray afterwards. I guess the last thing we can do, the only thing left to do, is pray. But if you're prayed up before, I'm telling you, it changes everything in you. Because you are preparing yourself for the storm. You're not just waiting for it. So you come to church and you're filled with hope, the music, the song, the lyrics, the prayers, the message, the witnessing, the testifying, everything that's going on here, the fellowshipping, it all adds. But none of that matters when you're going through a trial. When you leave here and you get a phone call, none of this matters. You're not thinking about the songs. You're not thinking about the worship. You're not thinking about the message that God gave you on hope. No, you're just running around with your hair on fire. And really, that's what we need to do. You stop and say, Lord, you have my attention. Father, Lord, the storm, I'm not able to do anything in the storm, Lord. I'm petrified. And I'm paralyzed. And I need you. The waters, as I've shared with you, they speak of troubles and trials. And like Noah, God is faithful to those who faithfully serve him. Actually, God is faithful to you even when you are not. And if he does that for you when you are not being faithful, how much more will he be faithful to you when you are? In your greatest trial, your greatest storm, I've had some tests in my life. I've had some real tests in my life. Some challenges in my life. And God has never disappointed me. He has never disappointed me. And I'm very analytical. I can be. And I take into account the things in my life. And I think, man, in the scale, in the balance of it all, my troubles, my hurt, my pain, my suffering is here. Everything here. This is the mountain that God has moved in my life. I'm no longer defined by my past of who I was. No longer. Those are the mountains that at one time I thought would overtake me, that would swallow me up. And I look now where I'm at and I see that I'm standing, not because I am strong or I'm great, but because I serve a great God. That's really the only reason why you're here today. You're here today. All of you. The only reason why you're here is because God has brought you through it. He has been on the boat. He has been in the tempest and has called you out. That's the only reason. And some people still live in that. They still live in that storm. They still live in that fear. They still live in that boat. And God's called you out. You think about Noah. The greatest judgment, it was universal. It happened everywhere. And it just kind of amazes me because science always wants to dispel everything of the Bible, right? I've shared with you that the Red Sea, there are some who say that parts of the Red Sea, the water may be only 2 feet deep, which to me is a greater miracle because then God caused the army of Pharaoh to drown in 2 feet of water, right? So, to me, that's even a greater miracle. But you think about Noah and all that he had to endure. Some scientists say that it wasn't a universal flood, but rather it was a regional flood. It happened where Noah was at. The problem is the science all over the world disputes that. When water leaves a mark, have you ever seen these homes after they've been flooded? You can see the highest level because that's where the water line's at. And that's exactly what we have in the mountains and the cliffs and the formations all around the world today. Every one of them have been submerged underwater. I just want to make another point, a couple of points. God has mercy on whoever he wants to have mercy on. If you remember the parable of the landowner who went out and began to call people, look for men to come and work in his fields. Do you remember that? And that he would call them and he promised to pay them a day's worth, and these men were desperate, you know. Any work that we could possibly get. What was that movie we watched the other day about the boxer? Cinderella Man. Even with a broken hand, he would go and he would put his hand behind him and look for work. And they would, even with a broken hand, this man would do anything he could to feed his family. Anything that he can do. And I'm thinking how desperate sometimes we are, even in our brokenness. God can have mercy on whoever, and he hired these men to come out. And then on the 11th hour, 1 hour before people were expected to stop working, he went out and he brought someone else back to work. Now, the men who had been there all day supposed that if the landowner was going to pay this guy a full day's wage for being there 1 hour, that everybody else was going to get a bonus. Man, they're going to get paid really good because they were there all day. And no, he paid them what he had promised them, a denarius. And they began to grumble. And he says, what is it to you? What business is it of yours? If I make an agreement with this man who comes to work for me with 1 hour left, and I tell him, if you come and work, I will give you a full day's work. What is it to you? This is my business. I paid you what we agreed. Sometimes we do that as Christians. We think that I've been here longer, I've been more faithful. Why would you save them, or why would he get a prominent place and not me? That's not how God works. He would tell you the same thing. What is it to you how I run my church? That I promise somebody that I have a calling, and this person's been chosen for this moment in time to do what I've called him to do. That Cinderella man was happy to get paid. He was happy to work. In fact, he worked harder so he could get picked the next day and the next day. It was heart. It was his family. You know, as he's fighting, this is a true story of this man who was boxing. And when he was on the mat and they began to count him out, he'd have pictures of his kids who were hungry. And there were days where they had nothing to eat. And that got him up off the mat. And folks, we have people counting on us, don't we? We have a lot of people counting on us. God has mercy on those he chooses to show mercy. And there are many who seem to not get what they deserve in this life. I watched a short video on Lazarus and the rich man. And it was so profound, I probably will show it here. It's like 20 minutes long. And I was watching that last night, and how he cried to Abraham for relief. I think there'll be so many who have come through this door who never really committed to the things of God. Folks, we all suffer. We all have troubles and we all have trials in our lives, but we have a God who is greater. We think that our circumstances, that we're just a product. We're victims, and that's not what it is. God has allowed these things in our life as tests for us, that we might be able, in that test, to recognize who God is and understand how great of a God that he is. And I'm not saying that we welcome every test. I'm not here to tell you that I've enjoyed it. I don't know that I've enjoyed any of them. But what I have enjoyed is that in those tests, he was with me. In one translation of the story of Jesus in the storm and Peter coming out, the scripture says that Jesus was walking near the boat, okay, and his intention was to pass them by. What's that about? What's that about? Why would Jesus pass them by? Have you ever done that to somebody? You know, I used to tell the boys to get out there and do something, and I tried to tell them how to do it, and they said, "No, Dad, we got it. We know what we're doing. It's okay, Dad." So I'd be all right. And I go do what I was supposed to do, and I tell them, you guys haven't started yet? You know, and they're yelling at the piece of machinery they're supposed to try to get going, you know. Of course, I know every trick. Every spring I have to clean them and start them and all that. I know everything about them, how to choke them. You know, you got to talk to them nice, and you know, I'm serious. Equipment after a winter, they're hard. The first yard cleaning is the toughest. It is the toughest because you have so much. You have so much residual work from the winter. You haven't touched it since last summer. And so then finally they'd complain. Well, this stupid piece of equipment, this lawnmower, Dad, this tractor, whatever it is. I said, wait a minute, you told me you knew how to start it. Well, away. Boom, starts right up. Sometimes we need someone that knows how to start things up in our lives, don't we? It could be me. It could be your pastor, right? It could be somebody else in here who's experienced and who's looking at your labor and saying, you know, you don't have to do that alone. I'll say this and we'll close. I was having breakfast one day after our men's Bible study. And there was a gentleman that come to our study that Wednesday. And I've known him, went to school with him. And anyway, this other guy was with us. And he said, guys, I have to go. We tell him, why are you leaving so quick, so early? He says, well, I got a field that has been, all of it has been cut and baled. And I got to go, I forget how big it was, 5-6 acres that he had to go and pick up all the bales and stack them. He says, I got a lot of work. I don't have any help, so I'm going to have to go out there. And this gentleman says, you know, I'll be there. I'll help you. Now, I don't know if any of you all have ever hauled hay. Okay? It ain't fun work. It's dirty work. You're sweating that straw, that grass goes down your back. It's nasty work, man, and it's tiring work. And you better have tough hands. I could never use gloves because I'd throw the bale. My glove went with it, and it's on top of the truck. You know, so I never used them. And, you know, I just, this brother said, you know, I don't work. He says, I'm retired. He says, I'd be happy to go. And then I saw that same man at the bank later that day. I said, how'd it go this morning? He said, oh, he had they had about 400 bales that we had to load. He said, we got them done together. He said, it really wasn't bad. Things always go better when you have somebody helping you. Just like that little girl back there. Sometimes she needs help putting her shoes on. Or, you know, they come out of the bedroom and you look down and their shoes, they have the wrong shoes on the wrong feet, right? And it's okay with them. That's like, they don't mind. In fact, Reagan used to get upset when we'd switch them. That answers a lot of things about Reagan. But anyway, he'd get upset about them, that we took them off and put them the right way. Some of us, sometimes God will use us to tell us, you're doing it wrong. Your heart is right. And you have great effort and a great attitude. But you're not getting what God wanted you to get out of this. Don't chase away your storms. Don't wish them away. Don't hunker down. You need to confront them because they're tests. And God's not going to make the test easy. And as I look back in my life, I could see where they graduated. The tests were kind of hard at first. You know, they weren't great tests, but you know, like telling your friends about Jesus, I'd get so nervous, my hands would get sweaty, and having to talk to them about the Bible, you know. And then now, talking to somebody about Jesus is like talking about my kids or my grandkids. It just comes natural because I want to do that. And God's purpose out of my life. We're going to continue in this because we're going to talk directly about fear. Let me make one more point. God told Noah that he was bringing a storm. Can I tell you that God's going to tell you a lot of times when the storm's headed your way? You already know it. And I'll explain that a little bit more next week. Okay?